Welcome to The Backstory, a podcast from the North Dakota News Cooperative that takes an in-depth look at the stories we're reporting for you. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. The story we're talking about today was headlined, Policy Reversals Stall North Dakota's Clean Energy Momentum. And we're doing things just a little bit differently today for this podcast. Normally we have Michael joining me right away, but today we are starting off with a guest who's going to give us a lot more clarity on the issue of energy in North Dakota. So joining us today is Josh Kramer, the General Manager and Executive Vice President of the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. Josh, thanks again for joining me today. There's been a lot of talk around the state recently about data centers and also about increases in electricity costs. So there are some ways that these go together, but there's a lot more to the increases beyond just that. So it's a complicated issue, and that's why we asked you to join us. But let's start out with the bigger picture. There's obviously a lot of public interest around transmission, congestion fees, and grid strain. So from your perspective, what is actually driving these costs right now? And really, how much of a factor are data centers?
Yeah, so there's no doubt electricity is a hot topic today, whether it's here in the state or in the country. We have a lot more things that plug in. For the first time in 20 years, electricity load growth is being seen across the country. And so in most places, it's been kind of stagnant for a while, except for North Dakota. We're the exception. For the last 10 to 15 years, we've had probably some of the highest pace growth in electricity usage, mostly driven by the oil and gas industry. And so our cooperatives that serve that portion of the state, they're our members. They really doubled down and aggressively built out and improved infrastructure to serve oil and gas, Western North Dakota, improve reliability. So they really invested a lot up until now, and there's more to do. But I think there's no doubt between Basin Electric, Minn Kota Power Cooperative, which are our generation and transmission cooperatives, and our distribution cooperatives, we've put our money where our mouth is and invested billions in improving infrastructure.
In the article that this podcast is related to, Michael reports that the Basin Electric Power Company authorizes a rate increase of $6 per megawatt hour for its customers, which is an increase amounting to about 10% starting this coming January. Now, a statement from the company back in September cited increased capital spending on transmission and generation load, kind of what we're talking about. That said that any new large loads are being handled through a separate large load program. So the new large load program helps integrate big users without passing load costs onto existing members. So can you walk me through how something like that works and what protections might be in place for members?
Yeah, I think mitigating the risk and the insulating existing members is always a top priority for electric cooperatives. And so Basin Electric's new large load program, and I know Minn Kota has a similar program. Basically what it does is if a new large load, let's just say 50 megawatts or higher, wants to come into the system, there's a lot of work that has to be done. And so cooperatives have sophisticated, mechanisms to basically analyze, where is that load going to go? How much power is it going to use? And there's engineering studies that need to be done to basically say yay or nay, can we serve this load? And so that large load program captures that cost of those engineering studies and kind of that initial application phase. And then if it's determined that the project is to move on and they're able to serve it with, within their existing, with the existing power capacity that they have, they will ask the end user or the large load to provide the upfront costs to build the transmission that's necessary, and if more generation is needed and it's able to be built and secured, to also pay aid to construction for that as well. And so that all those billions of dollars you're hearing that the data centers are bringing into places in rural areas, with programs like Basin's large load program and Minn Kota's program, they're basically saying we'd love to serve you if we can. But you're also going to pay for those increased costs that would otherwise to be passed on to the membership, because they know that, they want to make sure that if they're going to, serve these loads, that should they, those assets aren't stranded ever. And again, that the financing and capital is available to do that.
So, what about infrastructure? Because obviously, as loads get bigger, and whether it's these large loads, users, or whatever the big companies are, or if it's just population growth in North Dakota, more people moving in and needing electrical power, does that mean infrastructure needs to be updated or needs to be added? Those types of things. I'm assuming, I mean, I'm not the electricity expert, but how do those costs kind of get factored into everything?
Yeah, I mean, if it's regular user member use, anything below 50 megawatts, that's spread out among the membership. The distribution cooperative brings the power from the substation to your home or your office or farm or ranch. And so those have traditionally been paid for by the membership to build out, because growth is good. Growth is kind of how those fixed costs of providing electricity are paid for over time. And so I don't want anyone to ever think that as cooperatives, we don't want to have growth in our area. But also we recognize that, we're limited by time and capacity. And so the typical response is when a new load is coming in is, yes, we would love to serve you, and we will do what we can if we can do it within our current, footprint, with our current level of power that we have in our area. But a lot of times it's, it's also say we can serve you, but it might take this amount of time, again, for the large loads. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I didn't want to focus this whole interview too much on data centers, but it is something that people are talking a lot about. So I wanted to ask a couple more questions about that, especially in some parts of the states, more eastern, where there are more data centers going in. We're hearing a lot from residents who are very concerned about the amount of energy that these centers do use and how it might affect them. And I've heard everything. And again, these are things that I'm hearing either or I'm seeing online in forums or hearing from people. Nothing has been confirmed or substantiated. And I just want to make that really clear to our listeners. But we are now talking with the expert to get some of these answers. But, I'm hearing people who are worried that the data centers are going to use so much energy that we're going to be facing brownouts or blackouts and energy won't be available because we don't have the infrastructure. Again, that is not a fact. That is just something that we're hearing. Or that it's going to drive up costs so far. So it's been difficult for some residents to handle. And I know that these are things that you experts in the industry are looking at and considering. What would you tell people who are worried about these things?
First, our cooperatives are built and ran by members of that same community. So the concerns that the community has are also the concerns of our rural electric cooperatives. So as electric cooperatives, the jurisdictional body is the board of directors, which is elected among the membership that lives in that community. That's what kind of makes us different from other utilities is we are operated, run, and governed by those we serve. And so those concerns are real. And I think those are all questions that our electric cooperatives have asked too. And so I think one thing to just really point out is data center projects aren't our projects, right? They're projects that are happening within our service area, and they're saying, can you provide electrical service? And so I think in the instances you reference, the cooperative has the capacity to do it. They've are doing the studies, and they're not going to take on a project if they're not able to serve it. And so I would say, as I said before, if a utility and a cooperative is able to serve a large load customer like a data center, it's in the best interest of the cooperative to be able to do that, because that helps to stabilize rates within that service area, because growth is good in that instance. And so that doesn't speak to the emergence of data centers all across the country, because other utilities might have different policies for adding load, and we all know we're connected to a worldwide or to a U.S. power grid. And so there's market prices that that could affect power. But I would say the best control of your own destiny is within a service area or within a community is if your utility is able to serve it without having to add additional cost. And in our instances of our cooperatives, the new large load program isolates that. I would recommend they really get serious about trying to see and making that possible.
You brought up something that I really want to highlight again. The data centers are not the energy company's projects. It's just another user coming in asking for services. The energy companies can't say, no, we're not going to give you these services. There has to be something that's worked out, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, just like I said, with any large project, there's a lot of, engineering studies that need to be done. That they need to look into the regional transmission organization. They got to put in the proper requests to be able to serve these loads. And so, there's a team of engineers within inside the electric cooperative. There's a team of engineers inside the RTOs that are going to all be involved in the process of being able to bring these new large loads on.
So like I said a few minutes ago, we don't want to focus this on just data centers, but it was something that's been on everybody's mind. Something else that's been on everybody's minds, we mentioned earlier in this conversation a price increase from basin electricity, but they're not the only ones. In fact, it's pretty much across the board. All of the different electric co-ops are having to raise some of their rates at this time, or we will be seeing more in the future. And they have given out those notices. And that is a concern for people, especially I think right now. Like we have seen in other times in our history, we're just at a point where people are very concerned about money overall, their home budget, and how they're going to take care of the family. And seeing something else with a price increase is concerning to them. Can you explain a little bit more about how just regular use and what's driving up these costs for us?
Right. And so I think the one thing that our cooperatives really are always concerned about is affordability and reliability and safety. And so they don't like to raise rates. The biggest driver of distribution cooperatives costs, that's the cooperative that brings the power to the end user, the member, are wholesale power costs. And so in every kind of stage within producing electricity and bringing it to people's homes, there's a lot of infrastructure out there. We have just nearly 70,000 miles of transmission line and distribution line across in North Dakota alone. And so that's enough to circle the earth 2.5 times. And so there's a lot to maintain. I think for a long time, we've really kept the rates as low as possible, and also being able to reinvest into the reliability of our system. But, our industry is bearing all the costs that we are as consumers, right? Labor's gone up, interest rates have gone up, materials, electric supply materials have gone up, more than 51% since the pandemic, and they haven't really come back down. So all the different things that are affecting, inflationary costs today, they're also affecting electric utilities.
Right. And switching gears just a little bit, another thing that the article that Michael wrote really focused on too is jobs. Jobs in the electric industry, jobs in other, green industries, green power industries, I guess. What are you seeing as far as either job growth or a decline in jobs available in North Dakota's energy industry?
Yeah, I mean, I always like one of my favorite things to talk about is our apprenticeship programs that we have within our cooperatives. And so we have apprenticeship programs for line workers. We have apprenticeship programs for relay techs, substation technicians. And so there's always demand for those positions, and not only just those positions, but, finance, engineering. So there are a lot of utility jobs in the state, and it's a really growing industry and area because of what I've said before. Like we're expanding. Transmission needs to be built, generation's being built, more places and things are electrified, and so the future is really bright for electric utility related jobs. And I think North Dakota is a driver. We have a lot of that. We have over 3,500 cooperative employees in the state of North Dakota.
So those are all the questions that I had for you, but I'd like to ask, well, I guess it's one more question, but what is it that you would really like for our listeners to know about the industry, about North Dakota energy, and just about, kind of everything that we covered?
Yeah. Well, it's the last day of October. October's co-op month. And so, I'm obviously biased toward electric cooperatives, but I think our model's great. We are not-for-profit electric utilities that are owned and operated by the members we serve. And so the advantage we have is all of the margin that that our member electric cooperatives get from basically providing and serving the power needs of their members either gets put back into the system in the form of reliability, or it gets returned to the membership, the users, in the form of capital credits. So end of the day, they own the cooperative. And so when rates go up, we are at cost power provider. And so when rates go up, that's what is needed to be able to deliver the electricity. We don't have, and there are other models out there of electric utility. But fortunately for us, we don't, our obligation is not to earn a profit for shareholders elsewhere. It's to serve our members. And I think that's one of the best things about electric cooperatives. And I think if you look over the course of history, the past 80 years, electric cooperatives have served every growing industry that we've had in this state. They've invested when they needed to, but they were smart about it, and also and deliberate. But they met every challenge in the past. They'll meet them in the future as well.
Thank you. Once again, we are speaking with Josh Kramer, the General Manager and Executive Vice President of the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. And I'm joined now by Michael Standard, who is our lead reporter at North Dakota News Cooperative, and he is the one who wrote the article we're discussing today. That article, again, was headlined Policy Reversals Stall North Dakota's Clean Energy Momentum. All right, Michael, so we just talked with Josh and heard a lot about information on pricing and the amount of users using our energy throughout the state. And I wanted to talk with you a little bit more about other things that you hit on in this article that are very important. And to start off with jobs, Josh and I did talk a little bit about jobs, but you went deeper into clean energy jobs and loss of funding and what the loss of some of this funding can mean for these jobs around the state.
Yeah, I've been kind of curious about this for quite some time, just wondering how many of these kind of jobs are here in North Dakota. I'd seen a lot of numbers from other states, but I hadn't really seen too much from here until recently. And then a couple companies, E2 and Evergreen Climate Innovations, had been compiling data both on jobs as well as all the different government grants and funding that's been revoked or lost in the past several months. So, North Dakota has close to 10,000 clean energy sector jobs. I mean, people doing, solar projects, wind technicians, other things to do with batteries, this sort of thing. And I thought it was pretty interesting that, compared to the oil and gas industry, which has about 30,000 direct in oil and gas extraction and things like that. It's pretty, it's a pretty high number compared to that. So 10,000 to 30,000. It's not, insignificant. I guess there's another 30,000 jobs related to oil and gas that aren't directly employed in oil and gas. And I'm not sure exactly how much that would be for the clean energy sector. I haven't seen those numbers. But it's a growing, and it has been growing over the last several years, growing, sector in the workforce. One thing that's kind of happening now is that the pace of that growth has slowed a little bit. It grew at its slowest pace since 2020. So in 2024, there were about 300 jobs added in clean energy sector jobs in the state. And from, the data that E2 and Evergreen Climate Innovations had, the traditional energy sectors like oil and gas had lost about 685 jobs in that same time. So it's growing at a good pace, and some of these different grants and funding that have been removed will probably lead to an even greater contraction in those jobs in the state, because there's a lot of planning going on to use those different funding sources. And some of these things have been in the works for a couple of years now. And like this nonprofit I spoke with, Indigenized Energy from the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe Reservation, they had been planning to roll out these projects over. It had been about a year of planning. So they'd already hired about 30 people. They were hiring maybe 30 more. And they've had to tell those people that they can't hire them now. And I think some of the 30 that they've hired are going to probably lose their positions or find other positions. Some of the people I spoke with, whether it was Indigenized Energy or some of the other clean energy companies, still are positive or optimistic about the growth of the industry. And, the jobs are there and will be there. It's just not going to grow as fast as they expected.
One of the things that you pointed out, in fact, you kind of led off the article with this too, is how some of the loss of some of these funds are really going to affect the indigenous communities around the state. You started out with explaining about the loss of funding for a solar project, and
Yeah.
that's going to be a problem. But tell us a little bit more about what you learned about how this is going to affect our indigenous communities.
So yeah, there was this program called Solar for All out of the Inflation Reduction Act, and there had been about 135 million that was going to go to this Solar for All program within what indigenized energy was going to operate over this 5-state region, mostly going to rooftop solar programs that would provide lower cost energy to lower income people. And I know, some of the numbers I saw, there was going to be about 8,500 rooftop solar installations, either to homes itself or, connected to homes in the Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara tribal lands. Cody Two Bears from Indigenized Energy had planned different projects on, it was like a five-state area for, different tribal nations on those 5-state region. So they were planning on quite a few different projects. And, like I said before, they were going to hire probably 30 more people, and they're no longer going to hire those people because the funding was dropped. And then there was also another 125 million that was going to go through the Coalition for Green Capital. And those projects would have been both in tribal communities and rural communities in general in both North and South Dakota, also targeting lower income families. So it would have been interesting to see, how those would be rolled out and, who would have been covered. But unfortunately, we won't see that now.
And then you also spoke with Senator Kevin Kramer, and by the way, no relation to Josh Kramer, who we just had on the podcast with us, but you spoke with him about some of this funding loss and what it could mean for some of the lower income people that we have around the state. And what did he tell you?
Yeah, there's a program, low income home energy assistant program. I'd seen some other states that the funding for that had been impacted. I know Minnesota has had some impacts, but it's not been impacted so far in North Dakota. The Department of Health and Human Services said it's still operating normally, but about 38,000 people across the state utilize the funds from that LIHEAP program. There's some concern going forward whether that funding will, be funded next year. So I think one thing that Kramer was concerned about, he knew that this was utilized quite widely in the state, and it's very helpful, particularly in the harsh winters here, that this funding is needed. So I think he was talking with people about how that's important, and he said it remains a lifeline for some people in North Dakota.
For the people who may be losing these funds or won't have this help available to them, what can they do now?
So the LIHEAP program, it's still going forward right now in the state. It's just, it's uncertain whether it's going to go forward in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
So, energy bills would be higher for those people. I'm, what can they do to prepare is probably, save up money if they don't have those funds anymore. So it's hard to tell, whether those will be in place. My suspicion is that they'll probably fund it. With the government shutdown and all these different debates about funding and things like that. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Anyway, I think they'll eventually fund it. I haven't heard if the state would step up like they've done with SNAP if funding is lost. But that's something to kind of keep an eye on going forward. One other thing to mention, which was interesting, so the Energy and Environment News arm of Politico had reported that Project Tundra, which is a big carbon capture project attached to the Milton Young coal-fired power plant that's not really gone forward yet, but is planning to. And the Heartland Hydrogen Hub could potentially be cut. Funding for them could potentially be cut from the Department of Energy budget. Those projects had been big Governor Burgum projects, heavily supported by him. So it'll be interesting to see if those go forward, or at least the funding to them go forward. Just right now, it's uncertain. And Kramer was pushing for that funding to keep flowing to those projects, and he advised the people involved with those projects to keep on top of it and make sure they appeal if the funding does get cut. But there's all kinds of lists about different cuts that go around in DC right now. And I think part of the release of those is kind of get a gauge on how vocal people are about whether those should be funded or not. So I know Kramer was quite vocal about the funding going forward to those if they can.
All right. Well, that would be very helpful for the people who need it around the state, I'm sure. Thank you, Michael. And once again, the story that we've been talking about today was headlined Policy Reversals Stall North Dakota's Clean Energy Momentum. You can read that story on our website at newscoopnd.org or in one of our local newspaper partners. For the North Dakota News Cooperative, I'm Sabrina Halvorson. This has been The Backstory.